Hello, Mark Gallagher here, and this is my submission for the final project of EDUC 8102, Teaching in Higher Education. In terms of what I'll cover here, I'll do a 30,000 foot view of the project, so what the overall aims were, a layout of the syllabus, including the course design and structure. I'll walk through my instructional media example, which uses Mentimeter. So for those of you that aren't familiar, I'll give you a glimpse at what kind of capabilities you can get with a service like Mentimeter. I'll also walk through the design of the assignment or the assessment and the instructional strategies embedded around it, including the follow-up learning that will occur after the actual assignment. The design of the course survey, so how I would like to evaluate my course outcomes and help refine the course moving forward that I designed, and then my project reflection and key takeaways, not just from the project, from this class at large. So, in terms of an overview, my goal with this project was to develop a field-based graduate level course for second-year school psychology students, and it needed to cover how to implement and develop a comprehensive school-based mental health program and successfully implement it, including working with community partners, conducting assessment in a meaningful manner, having prevention activities, intervention, crisis response, etc. I was bent on the content being meaningfully sequenced and highly engaging. As someone that has sat in some of these classes before, I thought it was a really cool opportunity to try to design it a little bit differently in such a way that I wished I would have had a slightly different experience when I completed them. I wanted to make sure that students learned concepts and practices that align to the National Association for School Psychologists training and practice standards, and the concepts and practices that the learners would engage with and use would have immediate utility. My other goal or aim within the project was to make sure that assessment served multiple purposes, so that I could assess knowledge, but also create opportunities for feedback, whether that's self-reflection or self-monitoring, or even peer reflection or peer feedback, and have the opportunity to engage in discourse during class built around the assessment, which were these field activity collections. So I'll talk a little bit more about here in a minute. And then the course had to be designed through an instructional design model. And in terms of design, I actually ended up going with backwards design and started with the summative outcomes. So in this particular course, one of the requirements is that students have to complete a key assessment, and they have to demonstrate mastery on that key assessment, which ended up being an applied capstone project. They have to attain mastery on that in order to continue with program matriculation and to progress into subsequent coursework. So kind of a big deal. So once I kind of hammered out what that summative outcome was going to look like with the key assessment, then I immediately worked backwards into the major topics, or each major topic, and then what each module would look like within that topic. And in terms of actually laying out the modules, that really became module assessment. So what was I going to assess within each of the major topics? So like the first major topic that I stepped into after establishing the summative was community collaboration. So another, like the next thing right before the final end state. And within community collaboration, the last thing I would cover is systems coordination, and the thing after that would be community partners. So kind of in a roundabout way, again, starting at the very end with that summative assessment, and then progressing into sequentially the major topics, and then what modules would fit underneath, module assessments would fit underneath of those topics. So I would go from community collaboration and then into crisis response. So crisis response being the second to last content I would cover, and then community collaboration being the last. In terms of the syllabus, the main key component of all of this is that the students need to learn how to design a comprehensive mental and behavioral health system, and do that through community partner engagement, how to implement prevention, screening, intervention, post-prevention implementation, crisis response procedures, etc. So a number, kind of a wide range of concepts that all fit within mental behavioral health system implementation that we were going to have to cover, which got distilled down into 5 major topics: prevention, assessment, intervention, crisis response, and collaboration, with each module having, or each module fitting into one of these major topics and working through them sequentially. In terms of course outcomes, I had mentioned the professional and training standards of the National Association of School Psychologists. That ended up being used to design the course outcomes. This does say example. I mean, these ultimately were 2 of the 12 course outcomes that I outlined for the particular course, and they all align back to the NASP training and practice standards. And then in terms of module topics, the major topic was prevention, but then the modules underneath of there included content like school connectedness and Tier 1 PBIS, things that fit within the prevention model and within the intervention topic and within the assessment topic, so on and so forth. So we'd always have a cluster of 2 to 3 modules that would fit within one particular topic theme. In terms of sequencing, like I had mentioned before, I was really bent on having this meaningful sequence. I also think it's really important for students to have background knowledge before they engage in any kind of field activities, so they know what the heck they're looking for. So in this case, in terms of sequencing, during an initial class, we'll always do a topic introduction to build background knowledge. So in this case, the example I use is school connectedness and Tier 1 PBIS. That would be the first module for the prevention topic. In between classes, though, the students will then go out and complete a field collection, which would be this exploratory learning experience where they're engaging with their practicum supervisors and other school personnel to more or less engage in a miniature needs analysis for that particular module within that particular topic. So they're getting a snippet of information. And overall, as they collect these snippets of information, these micro needs assessments, those then get compiled and synthesized to form their summative assessment. So there's lots of it's essentially everything's formative in a roundabout way until we get to the summative capstone project or the key assessment at the very, very end. But after completing those field collections during the next class, we'll come together and engage in reflection. We'll work through some feedback loops and cycles, engage in discourse, and have a conversation about what we actually discovered, particularly through a practice called harvesting from Yi. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to my instructional strategies. I did want to show my instructional media really quickly. So this is I'm going to show you Mentimeter. This is a platform that I plan on using as my opener or hook for some of these topics in order to help the students build a frame of reference. And if you're not familiar with Mentimeter, it allows you to create these interactive polling opportunities. So over on the left is what would be displayed up on the screen. Participants scan the QR code or put in that 8-digit code underneath of menti.com to join the particular poll. It goes live. And so over on the right would be the individual on their device as them actually going through and weighing in and providing information on what they think to be true about each of these statements. And all of these are centered on that Tier 1 PBIS and school connectedness module. In all of these questions create an opportunity for us to put our assumptions out there, but then have a meaningful conversation about what the data actually tells us to help us frame why we should actually care about the content within this particular topic. In terms of assignment overview, I'd mentioned it's a field collection. Each one is designed to be worth 30 points, and that ties directly to the rubric we'll take a look at here in a second. And it involves them gathering information from their current supervisors based upon a series of very short guided questions. Like I had mentioned before, it ultimately turns into a micro needs assessment, but the collection of those of all those field activities becomes critical for the actual systems analysis project, which would be the summative or that master, the key assessment that they have to attain mastery on. And throughout the course of the assignment, students will respond to each of the guiding questions with a yes, no, or partially implemented. But the most important thing is that they have to provide context for why they selected that particular response. It's not as simple as yes, the school has this thing, or no, they don't, or it's partially implemented. The really critical part is the context. So why is it a yes? Why is it a no? Why is it only partially implemented? The goal here is to get them asking questions as part of that experiential learning. And so at the conclusion of each field activity, they then synthesize their findings in a summary at the bottom of the document. I'll show you what that looks like here in a minute. And then that's what they end up submitting to Blackboard Alter, which is our learning management system for Toledo. And then each of the assignments would be evaluated through a rubric. The way I design my rubric, it can be leveraged and utilized for each of the field activity collections. So it's not like a specific rubric for a specific field activity collection. It can be utilized for all of them. In terms of what the activity guide looks like, so I have the school connectedness and PBIS tier 1 practices example here. So only 6 questions. Again, it's an opportunity for the graduate students to sit down and have a conversation with their practicum supervisors or other school personnel. Really, it's who's best positioned to help answer the questions. And we're asking things like, is there evidence to suggest, this special team with the necessary personnel exists within the school? Yes, no, partially. Why is that so? To things like, are there other unique systems or opportunities that help foster school connectedness? So, for example, like mentorship programs, a house system like, in the Harry Potter books and films, or like culture fairs or holidays around the world. And then taking, again, their findings, synthesizing them, and then compiling a summary that then can be leveraged as part or in part for the completion of the systems analysis project, that key assessment or the summative assessment at the end of the course. With regards to the rubric, like I had mentioned, I designed it so that it could be utilized with any of the field activity collections. So ultimately what I'm looking for is the completion of formatting of the actual field collection. So did we use the yes, no, or partially taxonomy? Did we provide context and evidence? And did we actually put together a summary? And then splitting that out from those 3 criteria along a 4-level hierarchy of does not meet expectations to partially meets expectations to meets to exceeds expectations. So one rubric to kind of rule them all on those field activity collections. I'd already mentioned in terms of instructional strategies harvesting from Yi, which creates this opportunity for this didactic discourse or guided discourse in class after the field activity collection. So why did we, what did we find out? Why do we think that to be true? How could it look differently, et cetera? And that really creates an opportunity for a feedback loop there based upon what the students are bringing to the table and what's uncovered within that discourse. The assignment in and of itself is a learning oriented assessment. So we're learning, or the students are learning, just by having engagement with their practicum supervisors and having a conversation and discourse around the particular guiding questions. And it also reinforces the learning that we engage with in class. So sometimes what they find is, holy cow, this thing that we learned doesn't exist in virtually any of our schools. Well, let's have a conversation around why that is likely to be the case. And then we can have meaningful conversation around barriers to implementation, et cetera, or logistical challenges in schools. And so it turns into, the assessment leads us into this other, this experiential learning experience. And the last practice, and this is, I think, just absolutely critical, is the opportunity for feedback. So even after the completion of the assignment, there's opportunity for feedback through the rubric and through, like comments and notes. But then also utilizing feedback in very close proximity to the completion of the activity. We want to make sure that, between the background knowledge and the opportunity for learning through the assessment or through the assignment, we're providing feedback in very, very close proximity to those, so we can make sure that we're landing in the right places from an instructional standpoint or from a learning standpoint. In terms of the end of course survey, I tried to keep it very simple, just 10 questions, 9 of them through a Likert scale, strongly disagree to strongly agree, and then having one open-ended question at the very end. Things that I thought were worthwhile are, the content being presented, having relevance to the work of a school psychologist, or what they learned as being valuable to their work as a school psychologist, or things like the content was presented in a manner that made it accessible to me, to a learner, or that the grading practices were fair, etc. So I felt like these types of questions could at least position me to refine the course and just improve it over time based on what feedback looked like from students. So feedback doesn't necessarily just have to be a one-way street from instructor to student, but I think there's an opportunity for learners to weigh in here to make courses and content better. And my reflection and key takeaways. So I had a few here. The number one piece that I took away from this class is that learning does not happen by accident or in a vacuum. It requires some pretty significant intentionality and very deliberate planning. And using an instructional design model to do that can make the learning design process significantly easier and more organized. So just by taking backwards design, and I would argue that's not even the most robust instructional design model out there. But just taking something as straightforward and simple as backwards design really helped me lay out what the learning sequence and process is going to look like within this course. Also, one of my other key takeaways were that almost any instructional activity can be formative assessment, and formative assessment can serve multiple purposes. So anything from feedback opportunities to observations to discourse and conversation with students, like all of those things can become formative assessment. And formative assessment doesn't just have to be, or just assessment in general doesn't just have to be for the sake of assessment and for the sake of taking a grade, but we can use it for even learning purposes, for like experiential learning or applied learning. Like I'd mentioned before, I think feedback is incredibly important, and I would make the argument it's probably one of the most powerful instructional tools available to us as educators. And in terms of application, I'm currently using the concepts learned in this course for two real-time activities. One of them being this current redesign of the graduate level school psychology course for second-year students that I teach. And so I'll have this ready to go for the fall of this year. And then I'm also in the process of using Merrill's principles in order to design a year-long integrated professional learning workshop for principals and instructional coaches, which is not something we've ever done before in my current work placement, which is use an actual instructional design model to design a professional learning experiences. But it's been incredibly beneficial. So those are my key takeaways. I had a number of references throughout the course of the design of this project, and that is my final project submission.